Welcome back to Circus and Circuit, Unraveling Global Trade podcast. I'm Foronda, and today I want to explore a story that many people still misunderstand. A story of quiet transformation, careful ambition, and rising hope. I'm talking about Africa, not as a continent in crisis, but as a continent in motion. Africa is changing and the world is only beginning to notice. When most people think about Africa, their minds drift to headlines about poverty, conflict, or dependency. Seldom do they see the full picture. There are 54 fully recognized sovereign nations in Africa. All 54 of these nations are members of the United Nations. The African Union has 55 member states, which include these 54 countries plus Western Sahara, whose independence is disputed. Together, Africa represents 1.3 billion people and a combined economy large enough to be a major global player. Now, a bit more geography and a quick high school quiz for you. If you're ready, here's my first question. What is the largest country in Africa by area? And this is correct, it's Algeria. My question number 2, what is the largest African country by population? 1, 2, 3, and answer is Nigeria. And finally, smallest country in Africa, and this is Seychelles, an island nation. By the way, an interesting fact from my own life. Back in 2010, I had the privilege to meet Sir James Mancham, the founding president of Seychelles and one of the continent's most respected statesmen. He had lived through a peaceful transfer of power, years in exile, and a long journey back to national reconciliation. He signed a copy of his book for me, the book called Seychelles Global Citizen, a book that captured his beliefs that even the smallest nations can influence global affairs through peace, diplomacy, and openness. He shared very interesting facts about his life, and we even took picture together, and I still have the book and picture with me. And that time it was our first and unfortunately last meeting. He passed away suddenly just 4 days after the conference, after our meeting in Washington, D.C. But that short encounter stayed with me because it reminded me that African leadership is not defined by headlines or stereotypes. It's defined by individuals like Mancham, people who believed in unity, institution building, and power of cooperation. We can see this cooperation in creating the African Continental Free Trade Area. So what is the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA? The African Continental Free Trade Area is an agreement to create world's largest free trade zone by connecting 55 countries to form a single market for goods and services. It aims to boost intra-African trade, facilitate investment and the movement of people and capital, and reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers. The AfCFTA was established in 2018, became effective in 2019, and launched trading on January 1st of 2021, right during the pandemic. Despite its size, intra-African trade remains modest. As of 2023, formal intra-African trade was estimated at about $192.2 billion. It's roughly 3.2% increase over the previous year. And that makes up roughly 14.9% of continent's total trade, a small but meaningful step forward. To put that in contrast, in Europe, more than 2/3 of trade happens within the region. In Asia, about 60%, and with that, the internal African market is still underutilized. But under the agreement, that is about to change. Economists at the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa and other forecasters saying that with full implementation, intra-African trade could increase by 50% or more. Some even estimate a 400% growth by 2045. So when you think about it, that means African businesses, manufacturers, farmers, and exporters will finally have a massive interconnected market. A market where goods, people, and value chain do not need to be shipped across continents but can travel across borders within Africa itself. AfCFTA is more than a treaty. It's an infrastructure of trade, regulation, and integration. And here what it does in practice. First of all, it aims to remove tariffs on roughly 90% of goods traded among member countries. It seeks to standardize custom procedures, reduce border friction, and harmonize trade regulations across different countries that once operated under drastically different systems. It also opens the door to services trade, investment flows, and potentially greater labor and professional mobility. And finally, it encourages regional value-added production and not just raw commodity export. This has implications for industrialization, supply chain development, and job creation. So what does this mean in real terms? It means that Africa doesn't have to remain a continent defined by raw material, export, and commodity dependence. It can evolve into a network of integrated economies where production, manufacturing, processing, tax, services flow across borders without the cost and delays of import-export activities to different distant markets. It can be a supply chain where copper mined in one nation, refined in another, battery components assembled in third, and finished products distributed across the continent. And with all that, this is not a far-off vision. With this new agreement, it becomes a real possibility. Something that realistic and feasible. And if we will talk about some immediate benefits, some countries and regions are already benefiting from this early momentum. And let me just give you a few examples. In North Africa, Morocco has surged as a manufacturing and export center. It now hosts large automotive factories supplying vehicles to Europe and Africa. Meanwhile, Egypt is building logistics hubs to connect Africa, Middle East, and global markets. In East Africa, Kenya is emerging as a digital and fintech hub. Its transport, fintech, and e-commerce ecosystems help connect East African economies internally. Rwanda, for its size, is known for clean governance and relatively streamlined trade systems. In West Africa, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the leaders in cacao production, are starting to invest in processing and value-added production rather than just exporting raw beans. This is part of a broader, bigger shift toward regional value chains. And finally, southern part of Africa, which led by South Africa, continues to be a manufacturing anchor with strong mining, industrial, and financial sectors. And Nigeria, we already talked about it a little bit, about its population. So Nigeria, with its large domestic market, remains a critical player and combines agriculture, services, and of course, developing and growing consumer demand. Of course, this transformation, this transition faces real challenges. Some we could discuss now, and of course there are other challenges that not that obvious. But one of the major challenges that still remain in place is infrastructure that stays completely uneven. Many countries lack modern ports, reliable railroads, efficient logistics, or stable power supplies. These gaps make cross-border trade costly and uncertain. Non-tariff barriers are another constraint. Even if tariffs are eliminated, countries still have to navigate different regulations, custom procedures, border checkpoints, and governance systems. Inconsistent enforcement and bureaucracy can discourage traders. Another thing is political instability. And political instability in certain parts of Africa continues to be a risk. Conflicts, weak institutions, or weak regulations. It all makes investments and trade a gamble in some regions. Currency risk and dependence on external currencies also remain a reality. Cross-border trade often involve exchange rates, foreign currency access, and external debt, all of which add cost and complexity. And finally, there is the reality of overlapping regional blocs, each with its own legacy, agreements, bureaucracies, and sometimes conflicting regulations. So coordinating among them under the umbrella of AfCFTA is a massive institutional challenge. Now, despite these issues, there is a growing evidence that the AfCFTA framework is helping to address some of them. According to the latest analysis, the continent's trade integration institution, regulatory reforms, and investment and regional infrastructure are gradually building the foundation for a genuinely connected African market. In short, transformation will require time, consistency, and coordinated political will. But the direction itself is clear. And if we zoom this out for a moment, because what's happening in Africa isn't just a regional story, it's a global one. And if it will shape what is shaping, our future trade, energy, manufacturing, this means the whole world, whole geopolitics will change. By 2025, Africa is projected to account for roughly 1/4 of the world's population. This is a demographic shift on an epic scale, especially as many African countries urbanize, expand their middle class, and increase demand for goods, technology, housing, infrastructure, services. And at the same time, Africa holds a large share of world's critical minerals, those needed for the energy transition, for batteries, electronics, and green infrastructure. If processing, refining, and manufacturing scale up internally, Africa could become a powerhouse not just of raw materials, but of refined, value-added production. And by the way, if you haven't listened, I would highly recommend to listen my episode on critical minerals. Now, digital leap. Digital leap is already happening. African countries lead in mobile money adoption, fintech solutions, remote services, e-commerce, digital payments. All these technologies are bypassing traditional bottlenecks and building platform for new trade forms. The agreement gives African economies, even smaller ones like Seychelles, a foundation to coordinate, to cooperate, to trade internally before looking outward. And that reduces exposure to global supply chain shocks, reduces dependency, and of course, strengthens resilience. And in global regulations, whether about climate, trade, technology, minerals, a more integrated Africa speaks with more weight. The continent becomes a negotiating bloc, not a collection of fragmented states. Finally, African transformation challenges old assumptions. It forces us to rethink supply chain, production models, and global value distribution. It asks, why buy products from Asia when you can build them in Africa or serve growing African demand? So if you believe in the future of global trade, Africa deserves your attention. As we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with one clear thought. Africa's trade transformation is not an idea on paper. It's already happening and very much in a progress, in a process. And every month we see new signs of momentum. This year alone, companies like Volkswagen expanded assembly operation in Rwanda. Stellantis announced plans to strengthen its presence in Morocco, and Hyundai increased local production partnership in Ethiopia and Ghana. These investments are not isolated decisions, they reflect on growing confidence in Africa. And at the same time, Africa's fintech ecosystem is breaking its own records. Platforms like Flutterwave, Cheaper Cash, M-Pesa, and the Pan-African payments and settlement systems are reporting higher volume of cross-border transactions. Businesses across the continent are acting as if one unified market is already there. So they're not waiting for headlines or political speeches. They are moving goods, sending payments, building relationships across borders every single day. And much of this progress is quiet. Regulations are being updated, new ports and highways being built, rail systems in Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia being modernized, energy projects in Senegal, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, expanding regional grids. And with that, bit by bit, Africa's economy map is being reshaped through practical cooperation rather than competition. So Africa is rising. Not someday, not eventually, but actually now. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Kate Foronda, and until next time, stay tuned and stay informed.